Hi, Arina. Okay, so as you were talking about all the bioethics, this memory that was like etched in my brain from high school came to mind. I wrote a paper on euthanasia, and I got extra credit for saying it out loud. And the professor, or teacher, just came at me like, if I'm suffering, you kill me. And I just felt so small, and I said, you know, that's not my choice, that's God's. And so, for someone who has studied bioethics so extensively, what other comeback, or how would you approach that?
Sure. Thanks for your question. So, we are allowed to refuse treatment. So, for example, you get a diagnosis, I have cancer. Do you have to have chemotherapy? No, you can, because remember the proportionality. What is the effect of it? Was it going to help me? Am I willing to go through the bad parts of it, you know, in order to get, you know, some healing? The same with at the end of life. You don't have to have every treatment that is offered. If the treatment they're offering is 5% chance that you'll get better, but it's going to be very painful, and you just feel like you're not in a place where you want to take it, that's fine. What we can't do is to inject people with poison and kill them. That's not medicine, right? So you're right. But I think it goes back to those secular principles, bioethical principles of quality of life. I don't want to be a burden. This is most of the reasons why people would even consider assisted suicide or euthanasia. I don't want to be a burden on my family. I don't want to be a burden on society. I don't want to suffer. Well, guess what? Like, we as Christians, as Catholics, we say suffering is not necessarily a bad thing. We believe in redemptive suffering. So it's changing culture from the inside out, that even when there is suffering, it actually can bring good out of it. But that's what we're going against. It's against the idea, I don't want to suffer at any cost, and I want to decide for myself when I'm going to die. The problem with that is, if you look at reports from Washington State and Oregon, where they have assisted suicide, first of all, the rates go up, meaning that they say, well, only some people will use this. First of all, when you have the pill to kill yourself, most people don't just go home with it and say, okay, I'm just going to pop this pill. It usually sits somewhere for a while because they're deciding, am I going to actually do this? You don't know if, you know, the grandchild is in, you know, going to get into these pills. You also don't know if someone who wants the estate is going to drop one of them in your coffee one day. But also, even when these people take them, it's not a clean death, okay? People start, you know, asphyxiating, whatever. Sometimes, and especially if they have someone else in the room helping them, sometimes they'll just have to literally suffocate them, put a pillow over their head and kill them. Because the pill itself doesn't do the job, etc. I don't want to get into details of that too much, but what I'm saying is that what our principles are is that every life is worth living and has human dignity, and that we can decide which treatments we want to accept based on the proportionality of the effects, but that we can't play God. And so you're completely right, and I'm sorry that you were made to feel small, but hopefully you can all speak into culture and say that it's not about the quality of life, you know, and especially with abortion, they'll say, oh, your child is going to have Down syndrome or this, that, or the other. What about the quality of life? And it's not about that person's life is worth living. And sometimes they'll say, oh, your child's not going to live very long, and sometimes they live for decades, even with whatever condition. So they can't tell, and the quality of life is not a good reason to ever kill someone or prevent them from being born. So hopefully that helps you.
Thank you, Arina. Anyone else have a question? Here we go.
And
you can sit.
Thanks. Hi, I have a question about the paternalism thing that you were talking about. That has always resonated with me, so it's interesting to hear you say that that's not Catholic, you know? How do you reconcile like a broken system where like there's not mutual respect and trust a lot of times, you know?
Yeah, and I would say paternalism works both ways. So for example, speaking of progesterone, when I was pregnant with Kieran, and I knew I had low progesterone, we had to go into the hospital at one point just because I was afraid. I didn't know if I had an ectopic pregnancy. Thankfully, it wasn't. But I had pain on my side. But the doctor, I said, oh, can you just check my progesterone levels? Because I'm educated in what my body needs, what my numbers are. I was doing that with my OBGYN, with my family doctor. And he looked at me like, you don't need to know that. So paternalism works the other way too. When someone tells you, you don't need to know that, and I said, yes, I do, and I know more about my body than you do, you know? The same when I was in high school and I went into my family doctor, and for acne, he wanted to put me on the pill. And at the time, I didn't know the dangers of a pill as I do now, and thankfully I've never been on a pill, ever. But I knew at the time I did not want to be on a pill for acne. And so I think, so don't get me wrong, paternalism could go, if you don't have a good doctor that you trust, I think that's where the trust comes in, then it could be that someone's imposing something like that on you as well. So it's really a matter of that you can find a doctor, healthcare professional who you trust and you can have a back and forth with. So at the same time, it can't be a knee-jerk reaction to a doctor's expertise. I will listen to the doctor's expertise, but check it against my own knowledge and information that I've gotten as well, and knowledge about my own body.
This actually is kind of for Tina, but I think Arina can definitely help as well. And I really appreciate you talking about how we change public policy. Clearly, we have a Christian country. We were founded on Judeo-Christian principles, but we have a post-Christian society now, and sadly, government doesn't really reflect that anymore. So how do we change the Overton window? How do we create better public policy? I'm also an activist, and I love when you talked about current law that's on the books, right? And so there's a disconnect right now in the pro-life world with abolitionist groups versus incrementalist groups. And so I'm curious why Students for Life wouldn't advocate for a life at conception bill. And the abolitionist groups that I'm aware of, they want to push the 14th Amendment that already exists, that creates, again, personhood. Science confirms life begins at conception, and the 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law. It's what freed the slaves. And so again, how can we take that existing legislation, apply that to, again, every human being, life beginning at conception, and then how do we use Catholic bioethics to reshape the narrative, because ultimately it's a money situation. Planned Parenthood is a $2 billion organization, and so how does the Guiding Star Project go up against a $1 billion industry, and how do we encourage everybody in here to become grassroots activists at the local level to change and reshape our culture?
Okay, so first, I said Students for Life is for a Life at Conception Act. We've actually introduced one in several states, and we've been looking actively for a bill sponsor. So that's Life at Conception.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And so that is something we're working for. You asked so many things. So I just wanted, like, and you're talking about abolitionists versus incrementalism. For us, like, you do have to take the pulse of, you know, what's happening culturally. I know the big difference right now between Students for Life and the abolitionists is that we don't believe in the punishment of women. We think right now, where we stand with culture, if we are going to do, like, there's one bill that they want to give women the death penalty for having an abortion. That's huge. We just don't think that that's going to move the needle culturally. We're not going to get consensus on something like that, especially because we need the people in the middle to come to our side to create that Overton window. So for us, I think of it like, so when I was a kid in Oregon, there was no seatbelt law. And so we used to ride in the back of the pickup truck down I-5, like, woo! And then a seatbelt bill came into place, and there was no social media. So like, they did this whole process of education. And I know seatbelt is different than abortion, I know that. But they had a whole process of education where it was in the newspaper, they talked about it on the news. There were all these places where they'd stop you to make sure you had your seatbelt on. Your first pass, they'd be like, oh, well, you can have this ticket, or you can put this bumper sticker on your car that says click it or ticket. And then after that, it increased. Then all the police officers came to the elementary schools and did education about seatbelts. So for me, I think we need to look at where culture is. And when there was polling that was done, and it was very, really close between what people felt about heartbeat and conception. There was a lot of similar feelings. So why would you go with heartbeat? If it's that close, why don't we do conception? Plus, we try to take the most bioethical route we can. Obviously, we can create policy and advocate for policy, then it gets in legislators' hands. They do terrible things like add exceptions and all this stuff that, we try really hard to advocate against that, but there's a point at which your policy is out of your hands and it's gonna move forward, and there's not always a way to fix everything and make it perfect. But if we go too far past where culture's at, our bill isn't gonna get passed. And I think you saw this when Dobbs was overturned. What happened? Culture was not ready for that Supreme Court ruling, and we had a huge backlash with all these ballot initiatives. And I know there's a whole abortion industry, they were trying to get people to come out and vote for the president. Yeah, and so the other thing we're working on is defund Planned Parenthood. So we've been meeting on Capitol Hill, talking to the Speaker of the House and other legislators about why is President Trump funding his political enemy? Yep. And we have a Fox News ad that's been going all this week and will go next week too, asking that same question. There's Doge, there's ways to defund them. We're putting pressure on members of Congress to, when you get this reconciliation thing, don't pass any budget that includes funding for Planned Parenthood. But then we have to debar them from HHS, because as long as they can keep getting those access to those grants, then we're never going to fully defund them. So their revenue stream is so varied. Trump said he doesn't want to, it's not a federal issue, abortion, so then let's get it out of the federal government, let's stop funding our political enemy, Planned Parenthood. So we've been working on all that.
Arina, any final thoughts before you have to leave?
Yes, I think that what's important, and Tina talked about this a lot in her presentation, is that, again, if we want to make abortion unthinkable, let's have everything that all the bills and the culture really embrace children, really embrace family, really embrace life. And so doing a child tax credit, the more kids you have, you get tax breaks, help families out, doing the paid family leave so that moms and dads can be at home with children. It is so important, especially in the first year of life. And some countries actually give paid family leave for the whole year. That's unthinkable to us, but it shouldn't be, right? So let's look at ways to help the family, promote the family in practical ways through some of these laws. And I think that that's where we're at in a post-Roe, post-Dobbs era.